Admiral Kextar stood at the viewport of the Kraxan flagship Eternal Conquest, his scaled fingers tracing the edges of his ceremonial armor. The vast emptiness of space stretched before him, punctuated by an unremarkable yellow star and its orbital bodies. This was supposed to be another routine survey mission, cataloging primitive species for the Galactic database. After all, the Kraxan were the only true warriors of the cosmos, the sole species forged in the crucible of a death world. Admiral, his science officer, Vixna, called from her station. "We're detecting anomalous readings from the third planet." Kextar flicked his tail dismissively. "Another garden world with simple tool users, no doubt." "No, sir. The readings." Vixna's voice faltered. "The gravity is 1.2 times our homeworld's. Atmospheric composition includes corrosive oxygen, active tectonic plates, extreme temperature variations, multiple apex predators, and artificial satellites." The bridge fell silent. Kextar's bronze scales shifted as he turned sharply. "Impossible. No species could evolve intelligence in such conditions. Even we required genetic modification to." "Sir." The tactical officer's urgent voice cut through the tension. "We're detecting thousands of artificial objects in orbit. And communications. Vast amounts of data transmission." Kextar strode to the main display, his claws clicking against the deck plates. The holographic image showed a blue-green world, wrapped in swirling white clouds. But it was what surrounded the planet that made even his battle-hardened heart skip. A complex network of satellites, space stations, and what appeared to be primitive warships. "Show me the dominant species," he commanded. The image shifted to show bipedal creatures, soft-skinned, furless except for patches on their heads, no obvious natural weapons. They looked absurdly vulnerable. Yet as the data scrolled past, Kextar's eyes widened. These creatures, humans according to their own transmissions, had not only survived on their death world, but had thrived. They had no genetic modifications, no evolutionary advantages beyond their raw intelligence and adaptability. They had conquered every environment their world offered: frozen wastelands, scorching deserts, dense jungles, and even the depths of their oxygen-rich oceans. Their historical records, Vixna reported, her voice trembling with disbelief. They fought wars that would make our ancestors pause, not just against their environment, but against each other. Their weapons, their tactics, their sheer tenacity. The tactical officer interrupted again. "Sir, we've been detected. 3 of their vessels are on an intercept course." Kextar watched as the primitive human ships approached. They were ugly, utilitarian things, nothing like the sleek biological ships of the Kraxan. Yet something about them spoke of deadly purpose. Their design wasn't about beauty. It was about survival and effectiveness. "Open a channel," Kextar ordered, straightening his massive frame. For the first time in his long career, he felt uncertainty. These weren't the soft species of garden worlds. These weren't even like his own people, who had needed technological help to become what they were. These humans had done the impossible. They had not just survived a death world. They had mastered it. And now, they were reaching for the stars. The main screen flickered to life, showing the human female in what appeared to be a military uniform. Her face showed no fear at his fearsome appearance, only measured curiosity. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force," she said calmly. "You've entered restricted space. Identify yourself." Kextar felt his mandibles twitch in what his species would recognize as a smile. For the first time in his life, he was about to address equals, perhaps even superiors, in the art of survival. "I am Admiral Kextar of the Kraxan Empire," he replied, adding a respectful incline of his head that shocked his bridge crew. "And I believe we have much to learn from each other." The human captain's lips curved slightly. "Indeed we do, Admiral. Indeed we do." As the diplomatic exchanges began, Kextar couldn't help but think that the galaxy was about to change forever. The Kraxen were no longer alone in their claim to Deathworld supremacy, and somehow that made the universe feel both more dangerous and more exciting than ever before. 6 months after first contact, High Commander Zexful of the Kraxen Scientific Division paced in his private chambers aboard the research station, relentless inquiry. The holoprojections surrounding him displayed data from what his subordinates had dubbed the human trials. Impossible, he muttered, his scaled fingers dancing through the displays. They shouldn't have survived Trial 3, let alone succeeded. The experiments had begun innocently enough. The Kraxen Council, unconvinced by Admiral Kekstar's glowing reports, had authorized a series of covert tests on the newest human colonies. Nothing lethal, they weren't barbarians, but challenges designed to prove that humans couldn't possibly be true Deathworlders. The first trial had been simple: introduce aggressive but non-lethal fauna into the ecosystem of New Helena, humanity's newest agricultural colony. The Kraxen had expected the humans to abandon the planet within weeks. Instead, within days, the humans had not only identified the introduced species, but had begun developing countermeasures. Within 2 weeks, they'd domesticated several of the creatures for agricultural use. Adaptive repurposing, they called it. Trial 2 involved subtle atmospheric changes to another colony, making the air gradually thinner. The Kraxen expected evacuation. The humans built high-altitude adaptation facilities and developed new breathing techniques. Their children born there began showing natural adaptations within a single generation. But Trial 3, Zexful's tail lashed in agitation as he reviewed the data again. They had triggered a dormant volcanic system on the mining colony of Nexus Prime. The evacuation protocols had worked perfectly, too perfectly. Instead of abandoning the colony, the humans had transformed it. "Commander," his aide's voice interrupted his thoughts. "The human ambassador is requesting a meeting. She says it's urgent." Zexful felt his scales flatten against his skull. "Did she say why?" "No, sir, but she's smiling." That was never a good sign. In the months since first contact, the Kraxen had learned that human smiles could mean many things. Not all of them pleasant. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez waited in his office, examining a Kraxen battle trophy with apparent interest. She turned as he entered, and yes, she was indeed smiling. "Commander Zexful," she said pleasantly, "I thought we should discuss your recent scientific endeavors, particularly those involving our colonies." Zexful's heart rate spiked. "I'm not sure what you mean, Ambassador." She placed a data crystal on his desk. The volcanic activation on Nexus Prime had a very particular signature. Our scientists were quite impressed by the precision, almost as impressed as they were by the genetic markers on those native species on New Helena. Instead of anger, her voice held something worse: amusement. "Would you like to know what we did with the volcano?" she continued. "After we realized it was artificial, of course. The geothermal energy is powering a new type of shield generator. The mineral-rich ash has tripled our crop yields. We're actually hoping you might trigger a few more. They're quite useful, once you know how to harness them." Zexful sank into his chair, his ceremonial armor suddenly feeling very heavy. "You knew, the whole time." "Commander, we survived our own world's attempts to kill us for hundreds of thousands of years. Did you think we wouldn't notice yours?" She leaned forward. "But here's what's fascinating. Your tests taught us more about ourselves than they did you about us. Each challenge forced us to innovate, to adapt, to become stronger." She stood, straightening her diplomatic sash. "We'd like to propose a joint research initiative. Your species clearly has much to teach us about controlled environmental manipulation, and perhaps we could share some insights about turning obstacles into opportunities." Zexful stared at her, seeing humans in a new light. They hadn't just survived the tests. They'd turned them into tools for advancement. Even now, they were turning this diplomatic confrontation into an opportunity for collaboration. "There will be those among my people who won't approve," he said carefully. Ambassador Rodriguez's smile widened. There always are. On both sides. But consider this. If humans and Kraxen work together, combining your technological mastery with our adaptability. She left the sentence hanging. The possibilities would be endless. Zexful finished, feeling a new emotion. Excitement. Perhaps this was why Admiral Kekstar had shown such respect at first contact. As the ambassador left his office, Zexful began drafting a report to the council. The tests had proven something, just not what they'd intended. They had proven that humans weren't just survivors of a death world. They were its conquerors. And now they were offering to share that power of conquest through cooperation rather than competition. The galaxy would never be the same. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had never seen such an unprecedented gathering. Kraxen warriors stood shoulder to shoulder with human military officers, their former rivalry forgotten in the face of a greater threat. The holographic display at the center of the chamber showed a scene of devastation. The garden world of Eden 5, now a scorched ruin. Supreme Commander Raxloth of the Kraxen Defense Force spoke first, his voice grave. The swarm came without warning. 3 million colonists, both human and Kraxen, gone within hours. Our combined fleet arrived too late. Captain Maya Patil of Earth's Strategic Command stepped forward, her dark eyes reflecting the holographic flames. The swarm isn't just another spacefaring species. There's something else entirely, something that evolved in the void between stars. The assembled delegates murmured as new data scrolled across their screens. The swarm, as they'd been dubbed, were silicon-based life forms that traveled in massive, hive-like structures. They consumed everything in their path, breaking down both organic and inorganic matter to fuel their endless expansion. Our traditional weapons are ineffective, Raxloth continued, his scales dulled with fatigue. Their outer shell adapts to energy weapons, and their distributed consciousness makes targeting any vital points impossible. But we found something interesting, Maya interjected, bringing up new readings. They avoid Earth and Kraxos, both our homeworlds. They've skirted our core systems entirely. A Kraxen scientist, Dr. Vixna, now stepped up. We believe it's because they recognize both worlds as hostile environments. Our death worlds have natural defenses that the swarm instinctively avoids. The radiation levels, atmospheric composition, even our indigenous microbes. They're all toxic to the swarm, which gives us an advantage, Maya said, her voice gaining strength. We've been analyzing samples from both our worlds. The Human Kraxen Research Initiative has already yielded results. We can weaponize our own evolutionary advantages. The display shifted to show a new type of ship, unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. It combined the organic technology of the Kraxen with human industrial design principles. But what made it unique was its defense system. We call it the Gaia-class destroyer, Raxloth explained. Its hull is colonized by modified bacteria from Earth's deep-sea vents, while its weapon systems utilize crystalline structures based on Kraxen cave formations. The entire ship is, essentially, a piece of our death worlds made mobile. Maya took over. Initial simulations show the swarm cannot adapt to these biological and geological weapons because they've never encountered anything like them. They evolved to consume life that developed in gentle environments. Our world's harsh conditions are their weakness. The council chamber erupted in discussion. Many delegates were horrified by the idea of weaponizing the very elements that had made Earth and Kraxos so feared. Others saw the elegant logic. Fighting an unconventional enemy required unconventional solutions. Ambassador Rodriguez, now a veteran of human Kraxen relations, raised her hand for silence. We're not just proposing a military alliance. We're suggesting a complete merger of our capabilities. Kraxen environmental manipulation technology combined with human adaptability. Our strength isn't just in our weapons. It's in our ability to turn hostile environments into advantages. Supreme Commander Raxloth nodded. For too long, we Kraxen prided ourselves on being the galaxy's only Deathworlders. We saw it as proof of our superiority. But humans taught us something vital. True strength lies not in surviving harsh conditions, but in learning to thrive in them. And now, facing this threat, we must share that strength. The proposal was radical. It would mean creating joint colonies specifically designed to be hostile to the swarm. It meant terraforming worlds not to be more habitable, but to be more like the Deathworlds that had forged humanity and the Kraxen. As the council debated, Maya and Raxaloff shared a knowing look. They had both seen the footage from Eden 5. They knew what failure meant. The galaxy had grown soft, relying on technology to create perfect, peaceful environments. Perhaps it was time for a reminder that life had evolved not in comfort, but in struggle. The alliance would change everything. But then again, change was what both their species did best. The bridge of the GKS, defiant nature, shuddered as another wave of swarm entities broke against its bioengineered hull. Captain Maya Patel stood firm, watching the tactical display with unwavering focus. Beside her, Commander Kexnar's scales rippled with battle readiness as he coordinated their combined fleet's movements. Gaia-class destroyers reporting successful deployment of Earth-strain bacteria, the human tactical officer announced. Swarm biosignatures showing signs of degradation in sectors 7 through 12. Kraxen crystalline formations are destabilizing their communication networks. Kexnar added, his clawed fingers dancing across the organic interface. They're starting to fragment. The battle for the Centauri corridor had been raging for 3 days. The combined human Kraxen fleet had finally caught up with a major swarm cluster, preventing it from reaching the heavily populated garden worlds of the galactic core. But this was more than just a defensive action. It was the first real test of their new strategy. The defiant nature itself was a testament to their alliance. Its hull contained layers of modified coral from Earth's oceans, grown around a framework of Kraxen living metal. The weapon systems combined human nuclear technology with Kraxen biological engineering. Even the air on the bridge was a carefully calculated mix of both worlds' atmospheres, uncomfortable for both species, but ultimately making them stronger. Movement in Sector 13. The sensor officer called out, "The swarm is attempting to adapt to our bacterial attack." Maya allowed herself a grim smile. "Just as we predicted, Commander." Kexnar nodded, his mandibles clicking in anticipation. Initiating Phase 2. All ships, release the spores. From the fleet's flanks, specially designed carriers launched clouds of microscopic organisms, a hybrid species created in their joint laboratories. Based on Earth's extremophiles and enhanced with Kraxen adaptive capabilities, these organisms were designed to evolve faster than the swarm could adapt. The tactical display erupted with new data as the spores made contact with the swarm's silicon-based structures. The hybrid organisms began breaking down the enemy's outer shell, creating microscopic fissures that allowed deeper penetration of their other weapons. "They're trying to retreat," Maya observed, watching the swarm's formation collapse. "But they can't plot a safe course through the crystalline field we created. Because they think like a hive." Kexnar rumbled with satisfaction. "They can't comprehend why individual units would willingly place themselves in danger. They don't understand sacrifice." The battle continued to turn in their favor, but Maya knew better than to celebrate too early. She had learned that from both Earth's history and Kraxen tactical doctrine. The enemy was still dangerous, perhaps even more so when cornered. "New energy signature," the sensor officer suddenly shouted. "The swarm is. They're merging their remaining units." The tactical display showed the surviving swarm entities combining into a massive structure, larger than anything they'd encountered before. Its surface began to pulse with unknown energy patterns. "Analysis," Maya demanded. A young human scientist, working in tandem with a Kraxen researcher, responded quickly. "They're attempting to create a singular consciousness, a last-ditch effort to overcome our attacks through unified adaptation." Kexnar's scales darkened, the Kraxen equivalent of a frown. "If they succeed, all our current strategies will be useless. They'll learn to counter everything at once." Maya's mind raced. drawing on her knowledge of both human and Kraxan military history. Or they'll make themselves more vulnerable. Lieutenant Chen, what's the temperature in the crystalline field? -100 degrees Celsius, Captain. And the bacterial concentration in Sector 8. Maximum saturation, with phase levels approaching Earth deep-sea vent conditions. Maya turned to Kexnar, seeing the same realization dawn in his alien eyes. If they want to act as one entity, then they'll have to adapt to everything at once, he finished. Their distributed resilience was their strength. Maya opened a fleet-wide channel. All ships, concentrate fire on these coordinates. Push them toward the intersection of our environmental attacks. Let's see how they handle being a single target facing every hostile condition we can create simultaneously. The massive swarm entity tried to resist, but it was too late. Caught between extreme cold, caustic chemicals, radiation, and countless other environmental hazards, it couldn't adapt quickly enough. Its unified consciousness, meant to be its salvation, became its downfall as it tried and failed to protect itself from too many threats at once. As the entity began to break apart, Maya and Kexnar shared a moment of understanding. Their species had survived and thrived precisely because they could face multiple challenges at once. They had learned to be strong as individuals while working together, never sacrificing one's strength for another. The swarm had just learned the hard way that sometimes being a jack of all trades was better than being a master of one. 1 year after the Battle of the Centauri Corridor, the Great Hall of Synthesis on Earth hosted an unprecedented gathering. Representatives from every known spacefaring species sat beneath the transparent dome, watching as Earth's violent thunderstorms rolled across the sky, a sight that once would have terrified them, but now held a different meaning. Admiral Maya Patel, now Supreme Commander of the Joint Defense Force, stood at the podium alongside High Commander Kexnar. Behind them, a massive holoscreen displayed images from across the galaxy. New colonies rising on worlds that would once have been deemed uninhabitable, ships bearing both human and Kraxan design elements, and research facilities where scientists from all species worked together. A year ago, Maya began, her voice carrying across the hall. We faced an enemy that threatened to consume our entire galaxy. The swarm saw our diversity as a weakness, our different evolutionary paths as inefficient. They were wrong. Kexnar stepped forward, his battle-scarred scales gleaming under Earth's natural lightning. We learned that true strength comes not from surviving despite our environments, but because of them. Every challenge, every hardship, every seemingly hostile condition, these are not obstacles to be overcome, but teachers to be embraced. The holoscreen shifted to show the new Guardian-class vessels, their hybrid designs incorporating elements from dozens of species. What had begun as a human-Kraxan alliance had evolved into something far greater. Garden world species had begun voluntary exposure to more challenging environments. Guided by human and Kraxan expertise, their bodies and societies were changing, growing stronger. The swarm's defeat taught us all a crucial lesson, Maya continued. The universe is not divided into Deathworlders and Garden Worlders. There is no single right way to evolve. What matters is our willingness to adapt, to learn, to grow stronger not just as individual species, but as a galactic community. A delegation from one of the traditionally peaceful garden worlds stood up. Their spokesperson, once frail and delicate, now showed subtle signs of environmental adaptation. Our people have lived for millennia believing that comfort and safety were the highest goals of civilization. We were wrong. In the past year, voluntary participation in the Adaptive Integration Program has increased our species' resilience by 300%. Our children are being born stronger, more adaptable, more alive. The hall erupted in supportive calls and gestures from dozens of species. Even the most conservative garden world societies have begun to see the benefits of controlled exposure to challenging conditions. The galaxy was transforming. Kexnar raised his clawed hand for silence. But let us not forget the most important lesson. Strength does not come from isolation or superiority. We Craxan once prided ourselves on being the galaxy's only Deathworlders. Humans showed us that such pride was foolish. Together, we are creating something new, a civilization that embraces challenge while celebrating unity. Maya nodded, looking out over the assembled delegates. The swarm saw our diverse environments as a weakness because they could only think in terms of consumption and adaptation. They couldn't understand that true resilience comes from maintaining our individual strengths while learning from each other. Every world, from the harshest death world to the most peaceful garden planet, has something to teach us. The holoscreen showed final images from their ongoing monitoring of former swarm territory. Where the silicon-based entities had once threatened all life, new colonies now thrived, some in environments that would have been considered impossible to inhabit just a year ago. Humans worked alongside Craxan and dozens of other species, each contributing their unique perspectives and abilities. We stand here today not as Deathworlders or Garden Worlders, Maya declared, but as citizens of a galaxy that finally understands. Life thrives not in spite of challenges, but because of them. Our differences are not divisions to be overcome, but strengths to be shared. As if in response, a particularly loud thunderclap shook the great hall. No one flinched. Instead, delegates from across the galaxy smiled, each in their own way, understanding that what had once inspired fear now symbolized opportunity. The age of artificial division was over. The galaxy had learned that true strength comes not from the world that births you, but from the challenges you choose to face, and the allies you choose to face them with.